China is in America's backyard, and now thanks to new satellite images, we get a closer look at Chinese spy bases inside Cuba. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. We've known China has been active in Cuba for a while now, but new satellite images have been released of Chinese spy bases in Cuba. There have been concerns for many years about increased cooperation between Cuba and the Chinese Communist Party. For example, earlier this year, China resumed direct flights to the Caribbean island. And as my favorite state-run media, the Global Times, reported, Chinese tourists can now travel to Cuba visa-free. This might be the first time in the history of this channel I mentioned China, Cuba, and citizens being free to do something all in the same sentence. But these new satellite images of Chinese spy bases on the island, released by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, might be the most concerning thing yet. Of course, technically, this news isn't exactly new. As recently as mid-2023, reports surfaced of a mysterious Chinese spy base near Havana that had been there since at least 2019. But thanks to CSIS, we now know that there are no fewer than 4 Chinese spy bases in Cuba, which should concern us all, since there are several very important military bases in Florida, which at its nearest point is just under 100 miles to the north. These bases include the U.S. Southern Command, the MacDill Air Force Base, and the Naval Air Station Key West. Open source intelligence and satellite imagery helped CSIS confirm not just the existence of the bases, but their possible purpose. One base is in Bayucal. It appears to be devoted to SIGINT, that stands for Signals Intelligence, which comes from electronic signals and systems such as radar, communications networks, and weapons systems. As you might imagine, SIGINT is pretty important information. It allows the spy to monitor military capabilities and plans for future operations. The Bayucal base near the Cuban capital hosts warehouses and vehicles and maintenance storage facilities, plus housing and administration headquarters for personnel. But critically, this base also contains several areas for antenna and dish antenna technology. I assume for spying, but hopefully also to get their TVs extra channels. If you make them live on base, you might as well let them watch ESPN 14. The base also provides for ELINT, electronics intelligence, which is information mostly derived from electronic signals that don't contain speech or text. For decades, Bayucal has been a source of suspicions for its possible ties to Chinese intelligence activities. In 2016, it even featured in one of the presidential primary debates with Republican Florida Senator Marco Rubio, calling on Cuba to kick out this Chinese listening station in Bayucal. Then there's the El Salao base, just east of Santiago de Cuba, with a control building and foundations for up to 16 antennas encircling it. In addition, it also has 3 concentric circles around it, which could house up to 3 rings of future installations for antennas and reflectors. Access to this space would give China a highly strategic vantage point near Naval Station Guantanamo Bay, a key regional U.S. military base, which would provide them with the absolutely vital information of seeing where the United States accused terrorists go to languish for eternity. Once operational, this base would enhance air and maritime awareness in the region, which could put the U.S. and its local allies at serious risk, since they operate regularly in the area. And finally, the Calabazar SIGINT facility, which houses a dish antenna field, more storage warehouses, headquarters, and antenna fields, all powered by a solar farm. Did China finally commit to clean and green energy? I guess even they're afraid of Greta Thunberg. These antennas aren't your old-fashioned television set kind of antennas, according to the Associate Director of National Security Policy at Florida International University. Not only does this suggest that Beijing is building more sophisticated and bigger bases in Cuba, but that these significant upgrades will give the spy base more capability and power in gathering and disseminating sensitive information from the airwaves at various installations in South Florida. To make matters worse, this equipment on these bases could also spy on key American partners throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. The news of China establishing spy bases in Cuba is like that mole on the back of your neck. It's not new, but it's definitely worrying. Republican Florida Representative Carlos Jimenez was especially vocal about the situation, since his district alone houses the Key West Naval Air Station and Homestead Air Force Base, while being very close to the U.S. Southern Command headquarters. These are all not very far from Cuba or the CCP bases housed there. He said that this is an example of the growing influence of China and Russia in our hemisphere. And considering that around the time these new images broke, Russia's Navy visited Cuba and Venezuela, I would say he's right. Oh, it's like a big communist potluck, which sounds like a nightmare since whatever you bring is immediately confiscated by the government. Because Cuba is so close to Florida and its military bases, there are a number of ways that China can use these spy bases against the US, should it, say, come to Taiwan's aid in the event of a CCP invasion. China and Cuba could cooperate on sabotage or assassination operations, for example. That's to say nothing of disrupting key military supply lines. If you want to know how bad it is, they have Florida scared. Florida, the place that calls alligators on meth in a hurricane a typical Thursday. Of course, Beijing and Havana have both denied any espionage intentions, but strangely enough, US officials don't seem to believe them. One principal deputy spokesperson at the State Department said that officials in the US government had already talked about this a little bit more than a year ago, when reports of the bases started surfacing. He also said the US would continue to disrupt such spying efforts, which I'm sure will take even less time than it took to disrupt that spy balloon, right? It's definitely good news that the White House is aware of these reports and is taking it seriously. But given the US government's pattern of just holding talks with Xi Jinping on serious issues, maybe we shouldn't be all that complacent. Revealing China's secret spy activity is exactly what China Uncensored is all about. And that wouldn't be possible without our wonderful supporters on Patreon. As a thank you, I answer questions from these supporters at the ends of each episode. Today's comes from Adam B. Do you think China would ever get desperate enough to use a nuclear weapon on Taiwan? Doesn't China rely on Taiwan for advanced chips just like everyone else? I feel it would destroy the whole purpose of reunification. Great question, Adam. So I think it's very unlikely China would nuke Taiwan. I think they like to have the threat of nuclear war hanging over the head of the US to potentially scare them off from supporting Taiwan. But I'm sure the CCP feels there are many other options for conquering Taiwan that don't involve nukes. As for the advanced chips, the semiconductors, that's an important question. Taiwan does make the most advanced semiconductors in the world. Everyone needs them. But in the event of even a conventional invasion, it's very likely those factories would be destroyed, likely to never be rebuilt. Semiconductor factories cost tens of billions of dollars just to build, not to mention all the machinery and know-how that the CCP wouldn't have access to. So yes, if China invades Taiwan, everyone is going to lose a lot of the tech we're used to. But Taiwan is such an existential issue for China that I don't think that's their top priority. And that's why we have to prevent an invasion at all costs. Thanks for your support and your question, Adam. And thank you for watching. If you want to join Adam on Patreon, just click on that orange button. And here's another video I want to show you. It's from my newest channel, Gamers Unbeaten, where I hide controversial topics in short videos on video games featuring politics, philosophy, and a little bit of humor. This one is about the game Detroit Become Human and how AI is already changing our lives, including if a robot identifies as a woman, is it really a woman? Click here and let me know what you think. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.